There are two kinds of patience in this world. There is the patience of a man who sits quietly and hopes that things will get better on their own, that circumstances will shift, that the people around him will eventually come to their senses and do the right thing. And then there's the patience of a man who has already made his decision, who has weighed every option, examined every angle, and arrived at his conclusion in the privacy of his own mind, and who is simply waiting with perfect calm for the proper moment to act. I have been the second kind of man for as long as I can remember. My daughter, Claire, never understood that about me, and I suppose that is what made it possible for her to sit at my kitchen table on a Saturday in February and tell me what she thought was fair, without any idea at all what I had already done. My name is Noah Fletcher. I am 57 years old. For 31 years, I ran Fletcher Contracting out of a tan metal building on the east side of Clarksville, Tennessee. Residential builds, commercial renovation, church additions. Mostly, I built things for people who could not afford to have someone do the work badly, and then pay someone else to come fix it. You hired Noah Fletcher because it would be done right the first time, and because I would look you in the eye and tell you the truth about what it was going to cost. I am not a rich man. I am also not a poor man. I own the house on Sycamore Lane that my wife Patricia and I bought in 1998. I own my truck. I have a retirement account with $214,800 in it, money that I have been putting away every single month for 22 consecutive years, through good months and lean ones, due to recession in 2009 when I nearly lost a business. I also have a savings account with $47,600 in it, and I have touched that account exactly 4 times in my adult life. Once when Patricia got sick, and we needed to cover what insurance would not. Once when my truck engine died on Route 41 in 2019. And twice, when my daughter Claire called me and said she and Daniel needed help, and I pulled the money out without asking a single question, because that is what a father does. Patricia passed in August of 2021. Pancreatic cancer. She was 54 years old, and she had been the best person I have ever known for every one of those years, and I am not going to spend much time on that part of the story. It matters more than anything I have words for, but this is not a story about grief. What I will say is this. Patricia would have known what to do about Claire. She always did. She had this gift for saying a hard thing in a way that was so soft and so certain at the same time that the person hearing it could not help but understand it came from love. I never learned how to do that. I say the hard thing by doing something, and I let the doing speak for itself. Claire is my only child. She is 34 years old. She was always bright and particular, even as a girl, the kind of child who organized her bookshelf by color and got upset when someone put a book back in the wrong place. She married a man named Daniel Marsh when she was 27, and together they have a son named Eli who will turn 8 in June. Eli is the reason I am telling this story at all. Eli is a quiet kid. He has his grandmother's serious eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and he wears a Cincinnati Reds cap that I gave him at his 7th birthday party. He almost never takes it off. Not at the dinner table, not at church, not when his mother tells him to, which drives Claire absolutely mad, and which I find deeply and endlessly satisfying. He is, without question, the best person in that family, and I say that without a single moment of hesitation. He asks questions about how things are built. He wants to know why floors are level, and how walls hold up ceilings, and what happens to a foundation when you pour on ground that is too wet. I have spent more Sunday afternoons sitting on my front porch explaining load-bearing walls and the tensile strength of rebar to a 7-year-old boy in a Reds cap than I ever expected to spend, and I would not trade a single one of those afternoons for anything in this world. Daniel Marsh is a sales manager for a regional medical supply company. He makes decent money. He is also the kind of man who talks about money at the dinner table in a way that makes me very tired, and who has, in the 4 years I have known him well, never once asked me a question about myself that was not designed to find out how much I had. I need you to understand something before I go further. I did not experience what happened in February as an attack. What I felt was informed. Claire told me something about herself that she did not realize she was telling me, and I received that information the way I have always received information. Quietly, completely, and with the full intention of acting on it. When a man has spent 31 years in construction, he learns that information, even unwelcome information, especially unwelcome information, is the most useful thing there is. You cannot repair a foundation you have not inspected. You cannot reinforce a wall you have not tested. I had been watching things quietly for about 6 months before that Saturday in February. It started the previous August, on a Thursday evening, when Claire called me and asked, in a tone she probably thought was casual, how my retirement account worked. She said she was just curious. She wanted to know what the balance was, approximately. She asked whether the funds were in stocks or bonds or some kind of index. I gave her the general shape of it and changed the subject to Eli, which is what I do when I want conversation to go somewhere better. She let it go. Then she called again in October. This time she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Daniel had been speaking with a financial advisor, a colleague's recommendation, she said, and that this advisor thought I should consider restructuring my accounts. She used that word, restructuring, as though it were something she had just picked up casually and was passing along out of concern. I thanked her politely and told her I would think about it. I thought about it. I thought about it a great deal. Then in December, my sister-in-law Marvy called me from Lexington, Kentucky. Marvy is Patricia's older sister. She is 69 years old and has known Claire since Claire was a baby. She mentioned, in an uncomfortable tone, that Claire had called her the week before and asked whether Patricia had left anything in her name separately. Anything outside the joint estate that might have been overlooked. Marvy sounded uneasy, which is how I knew she understood the weight of what she was telling me. She is not a dramatic woman. For her to call me about it meant that something in Claire's question had made her feel I needed to know. I called James Whitfield the following Monday morning. James Whitfield has been an estate attorney in Clarksville for 23 years. His office is on Cedar Street, above a tax preparation place. The office smells like coffee and old paper in a way I have always found reassuring. James is a quiet man. He does not use 10 words when 3 will do the job, which is probably why we had gotten along. I had used James to update my will after Patricia passed. I trusted him. I sat in his office at December and told him what I had been observing. The August phone call, the October suggestion, the Lexington inquiry, and I asked him plainly and directly what my options were. He told me I had several. We discussed each one in detail. He laid them out the way I would lay out blueprints on a table. Clearly, precisely, without opinion until I asked for it. I went home that evening and sat with a decision for 3 weeks. I let it rest the way you let concrete cure. You do not rush concrete. You do not rush decisions that will outlast you. I am not a dramatic man. I have never been one for speeches or grand gestures or the kind of confrontation that some people seem to enjoy the way they enjoy a sport. I do not slam doors. I do not raise my voice. I do not need to announce what I am doing to everyone in the room before I do it. What I need, the only thing I have ever needed, is to be correct and to be able to look at myself in the mirror at 6 o'clock in the morning and know, without any doubt, that I acted with integrity and forethought. That is the only audience I have ever played to. That is the only judge whose verdict I have ever feared. The February visit happened on a Saturday. Claire arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon. She came alone. Daniel stayed home, which I noticed and filed away. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Patricia and I had eaten 10,000 meals, where Eli had once spilled orange juice and looked at me with such guilt that I laughed until my eyes watered. I made coffee. She had a look on her face that I recognized from when she was 15, her jaw set, her posture too straight, her hands flat on the table. She began with a preamble about caring and concern. She said she worried about me being alone. She said she had been thinking about my financial situation and was concerned I might do something impulsive with the estate. She used the word impulsive. I have been running a contracting business since 1992 and have not made an impulsive decision since approximately 1994, when I hired a plumber based on his personality instead of his references. But I sat there and let her talk, because listening is the first thing you do when someone is telling you what they actually want, even when the words they use are different from the truth. Then she said it. Dad, you can't just give your money away. That's not fair to us. She looked at me steadily when she said it. She held my eyes. She meant every single word. She was not performing concern. She was not playing a role. She genuinely believed in some deep and unexamined place inside herself That what I chose to do with the money I had earned over the course of my working life was a matter that properly included her opinion and her consent. She said that after everything, after Daniel's business setback 2 years ago, after the help they had needed, after everything that a family goes through together, it would not be right, it would not be fair for me to redirect my estate towards some charity or some cause that did not involve them. I looked at her for a long moment. I let the silence sit. Then I nodded slowly and said, "I hear you, Claire." She seemed satisfied. She seemed to believe she had accomplished what she came to accomplish. She stayed for another 40 minutes. We talked about Eli's school. She told me he had started a project about bridges for his third-grade science class, and that the teacher, Mrs. Delacroix, had asked him to present it to the whole school at the spring assembly. I told her that sounded about right for Eli. She laughed. It was a real laugh, a warm one, an unguarded one, and for a moment she was just my daughter again, the girl who used to sit on the same porch and ask me to explain how the stars stayed up. That part was fine. That part was normal. That part was us. She left at 4:03 in the afternoon. I watched her car pull out of the driveway and turn left on Sycamore Lane, and I stood in the doorway until the sound of the engine faded. Then I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long while. The coffee had gone cold. The rose bushes outside my kitchen window, the ones Patricia planted in 1997, the ones she tended every spring with a care that bordered on devotion, were bare and skeletal against the February sky. They would not bloom again until April, and in the quiet of that kitchen, with the refrigerator humming its low mechanical hymn and the afternoon light going gray and thin at the edges, I thought about what my daughter had said to me. I thought about 22 years of monthly deposits. I thought about the discipline it took to set that money aside month after month, through seasons when I could have used every dollar of it. I thought about the 2 times I had pulled money from savings for Claire without hesitating, without asking whether she had tried to solve the problem herself, without mentioning it again afterward. I thought about Daniel's particular talent for circling a question about money, without ever quite landing on it directly. I thought about Marvy's voice on the phone from Lexington, careful and reluctant, and I thought about Eli in his Reds cap, sitting on my porch steps in the autumn light, asking me why concrete hardens and what happens when the rebar is not placed correctly. I picked up the cold coffee cup. I poured the coffee down the sink. I washed the cup. I dried it. I placed it carefully in the drying rack beside the sink. There is something about performing a small, ordinary action with care that steadies a man when the larger things are in motion. Then I walked to the back room, the room that used to be Patricia's. Sewing room, and that I have since converted into a kind of study, with a filing cabinet and a desk lamp and a window that looks out onto backyard. And I opened the filing cabinet and took out the manila folder that James Whitfield and I had been working on since December. I sat at the kitchen table with it. I read through the documents one more time, slowly, the way I read a set of building plans before a job begins, checking every detail, making sure every piece is where it needs to be. I sat with it for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I closed the folder and put it back. The next morning was Sunday. I drove to the hardware store on Miller Avenue, which I do most Sundays regardless of whether I actually need anything. I have found, over the course of a lifetime, that walking the aisles of a hardware store is the single most effective method I know for clearing my head. There is something about the organized certainty of it, every tool in its proper place, every fastener sorted by size, every aisle labeled with specificity that leaves no room for ambiguity. That has always helped me think. The right tool for the right job. Everything where it belongs. I picked up a box of 2-inch with screws that I did not need and a new 4-foot level that I had been meaning to buy since October, and I drove home and made cornbread from the recipe Patricia taught me and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, because she was the one who made it worth sitting down for, and I have not quite managed to sit at the table with cornbread since she passed. Monday morning, I called James Whitfield's office at 8:47 a.m. and asked if he had time to see me on Tuesday. He said 8 o'clock would work fine. I arrived at his office on Cedar Street at 7:59 a.m. on Tuesday, February the 18th. I had a cup of coffee in a travel mug and the manila folder under my arm. James was already at his desk. He stood when I came in. He did not ask if I was sure, which I appreciated. He had been ready since December. We sat down. I placed the folder on the desk. James opened it and laid 3 documents across the surface in a careful row, the way a contractor lays out his tools before a job begins. The trust document was 11 pages long. I had read it 4 times. I understood every paragraph. James had explained the legal language around irrevocability, the trustee disbursement conditions, the tax implications, and I had asked every question that needed asking. The trust was an irrevocable educational trust, funded with $147,000 drawn from my savings and a designated portion of my retirement. It was structured to become available to Eli Fletcher Marsh, my grandson, age 7, upon his 18th birthday, for post-secondary education, vocational training, or the startup cost of a trade business of his choosing. My brother Dennis Whitaker, retired Army, living in Murfreesboro, was named as trustee in the event I passed before Eli reached eligibility. Dennis is the most honest man I know besides myself. Claire's name did not appear anywhere in the document. Neither did Daniel's. I signed on page 9, line 4, at 8:22 in the morning. James signed as witness. His assistant Janet came in from the front office and completed the notarization without looking particularly surprised, which told me this was not the most unusual thing that had ever happened at that desk on a Tuesday morning. James slid the document back into the folder. He looked at me in the way that men look at each other, when something that needed doing has been done, and when both of them understand the weight of what just happened without needing to name it. He said, "I'll file this at the courthouse this afternoon." I said, "I appreciate it, James." I drove home. I changed the oil in my truck, which had been overdue for 2 weeks. I made a sandwich and ate lunch at the kitchen counter. The afternoon was ordinary and deliberate, which is the way I have always preferred my afternoons. Some men measure the significance of a day by what was said. I have always measured mine by what was done. The weeks after were quiet. Claire called twice in March. Once to ask about Easter dinner, whether I wanted to do it at my place or theirs, and once to tell me about Eli's bridge project, which had apparently won a blue ribbon at the school science fair. First place. His teacher, Mrs. Delacroix, had written a note home saying that Eli had an unusual ability to explain structural concepts in terms that his classmates could understand. I told Claire that was not surprising in the least. She agreed warmly, and the call ended easily, the way conversations end between people who are, for the moment, standing on common ground. She did not bring up February. I did not bring up February. The trust was filed. The documents were in order. The concrete had set. There was nothing left to discuss. I thought about Claire a good deal during those weeks in March. Not with anger. I want to be precise about that. Anger is a fire that requires constant feeding, and I have never been a man who found much purpose in keeping fires burning that did not heat a room or cook a meal. What I thought about, instead, was the architecture of it, the way she had arrived at believing what she believed, the way a child grows up watching a father hold things together quietly, paying the bills, maintaining the house, absorbing the shocks, and draws the wrong conclusion from all of it, the conclusion that the holding together is automatic, that it requires no effort, no sacrifice, no deliberate choosing, that it will simply continue, indefinitely, regardless of what is demanded or extracted from it. Claire's mother died when Claire was 31. That is a hard thing at any age, and a particular kind of hard at 31, when you have just stopped needing a parent in the daily sense, but have not yet discovered all the ways you still need one. I believe the loss remade something in Claire, made her tighter, more anxious, more grasping around what she thought of as hers, as though she could prevent further loss by holding on harder. I do not say that to excuse what she did. I say it because a man who does not try to understand why his child became what she became has given up on a relationship. And I have not given up. I do not know whether that makes me generous or stubborn. With me, those have always been approximately the same thing. I also think Daniel made certain things worse. There is a particular kind of person who can take an insecurity and turn it into a policy, who can make worry into entitlement so gradually that the person experiencing it does not notice the transformation. I will not say more about Daniel than that. He is my daughter's husband and my grandson's father, and those two facts together are more than enough to keep me measured in what I say about him. Easter fell on April the 20th. Claire, Daniel, and Eli came to the house on Sycamore Lane just before noon. I had put a pot roasting at 9, Patricia's recipe, with rosemary and red wine and small potatoes around the edges. And the kitchen smelled the way it always smelled when Patricia had people coming over. That smell is either a comfort or a sharp grief, depending on the moment. And on that Easter, it was mostly a comfort. Eli came to the front door still wearing the Reds cap and immediately asked whether we could go look at the rose bushes, which he had apparently been thinking about since his last visit. We went outside together, and I showed him how the stems get woody and dormant in winter, how the plant pulls everything back into itself and waits, and then how it sends out new soft green shoots in spring when the time is right. He asked whether rose bushes have a foundation. I told him that was exactly the right way to think about it. The root system is a foundation, and the bush above ground is a structure, and you cannot have one without the other. Daniel shook my hand in the front doorway. He seemed relaxed. He complimented the pot roast. He did not, for once, ask about my finances. After dinner, while Claire was in the kitchen washing dishes and Daniel was in the living room watching a baseball game, Eli fell asleep in the wicker porch chair with his Reds cap pulled down over his eyes. I sat in the other chair, the one Patricia used to sit in, and I watched the rose bushes in the late afternoon light. They had come back well this year. Better than last year, in fact. The blooms were a deep, saturated pink that Patricia would have been proud of, and they moved gently in the warm April breeze. And for a few minutes I just sat and watched them and felt something very close to contentment. I was still sitting there when Claire came out to the screen door at approximately 3:41 in the afternoon, drying her hands on a dish towel. She had something in her other hand, a letter, a certified letter, still in its envelope, that had apparently been forwarded to her that morning as a digital notice from the Clarksville Probate and Records Office. She stood in the doorway with it. She looked at me. Between us, Eli slept with one small hand resting on the brim of his cap, and the other curled loosely around the armrest of the wicker chair. She said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "Come sit down, Claire." She sat in the chair on the other side of Eli. She held the letter carefully, as though it were something fragile or something dangerous. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. "You set up a trust," she said. Her voice was controlled. Not loud, not sharp, controlled, the way a person's voice sounds when they're working very hard to keep something out of it. "I did," I said. "For Eli?" "Yes." She looked at her son's sleeping face for a long, still moment. His eyelashes made small shadows on his cheeks. The cap had slipped slightly to one side. Then she looked back at me. "And I don't have any access to it. Not to the principal." I said, "No." There was a long silence between us. Down the street, a car passed slowly, and somewhere a few houses over, someone's dog barked twice and then stopped. One of the rose bushes moved in a gust of wind, and then settled. Claire folded the letter in half, precisely, deliberately, the way she used to fold her schoolwork when she was a girl, and set it on her knee. She said, "You did this because of what I said in February." I said, "I did this because of what I observed in August, and again in October, and because of what Marvy told me from Lexington in December. February was when I confirmed what I already suspected." She was quiet for a while after that. She did not argue against any of those 3 points. I took that as acknowledgement. Then she said very quietly, "I just didn't want you to be taken advantage of." I looked at her. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. The way you let a beam rest on its supports before you test whether it will hold weight. "Claire," I said, "I have been pouring concrete and reading contracts and calculating load-bearing capacity since before you were born. I have run a business for 31 years without a single lawsuit, a single lien, or a single customer who could honestly say I treated them unfairly. I understand what I am doing with my money, and what you were telling me in February was not about protecting me. You know that, and I know that, and we do not need to pretend otherwise." She did not answer. She looked down at the folded letter on her knee. "The trust is not a punishment," I said. "I need you to hear me on that, Claire. It is not a punishment, and it is not a rebuke. Eli is going to reach an age where he figures out what he wants to build with his life. When that day comes, he is going to need something to stand on, a foundation. I am going to make sure that foundation exists for him. That is not about you. It is not about Daniel. It is about him." She looked at the letter again. She looked at Eli. She looked at me. I watched something happen in her face then. Slowly, like a structure settling into place, the way buildings settle in the months after construction, when everything finds its true weight and its true alignment. She was arriving at something inside herself, and she was arriving at it because there was no leverage left, no angle to work, no argument to make that would hold. She was standing on what was simply true, and the truth, whatever else it is a solid place to stand. Her face grew quiet, not angry, not resentful. Quiet. She said, he would have loved to know this was his. He will know, I said, when he is old enough for it to mean something. She nodded, just once. We sat there for a long while after that, the two of us and the sleeping boy between us, and the rose bushes in the golden light, and the afternoon stretching out long and warm and gold across the yard. Nobody spoke. There was nothing that needed saying that had not been said. Daniel came out through the screen door at 4:15 and asked if they were ready to head home. Claire stood. She folded the letter once more, carefully, and tucked it into the pocket of her jacket. She lifted Eli out of the wicker chair, and he woke halfway, blinking, and tucked his face against her shoulder without fully opening his eyes. She carried him toward the car. At the car door, she stopped. She turned and looked back at me, still standing on the porch with the rose bushes behind me and the evening just beginning to gather at the edges of the sky. She said, I'm sorry, Dad, for February. I said, I know. She buckled Eli into back seat and climbed into the passenger side, and they pulled out of the driveway and drove away from Sycamore Lane at 4:21 on Easter Sunday. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table with the last of the pot roast and a cup of coffee that was still warm, and I thought about my daughter. I thought about the fact that she is difficult and complicated and frustrating and stubborn, and worth every single bit of the difficulty and the complication and the frustration and the stubbornness. I thought about the way she looked at Eli's sleeping face when she realized what the trust was for, when she understood, fully and finally, that I had not acted against her, but past her, toward the person who needed it most. There was something in that look that Patricia would have recognized immediately. I recognized it, too. It was the look of a person arriving at a truth they did not want to find, and discovering that the truth, even the unwelcome kind, was something they could live with. I did not feel victorious. Victory was never the point. What I felt was something closer to the end of a long job, the settled feeling that comes when the last board is set, and you walk the perimeter of the structure slowly, checking every joint, and you find the work is sound. There is satisfaction in that, but there is also the awareness of what it costs to get there, and what it costs is never nothing. Eli turned 8 in June. I drove to their house with a book about famous bridges of the world and a brand new Reds cap, because the old one had finally reached the end of its useful life. The brim was frayed, the logo was faded, and it smelled the way only a 7-year-old boy's baseball cap can smell. He met me at the front door wearing the old cap, which he had apparently refused to throw away under any circumstances, and he looked at the new one in my hands, and he looked at me, and then he put the new cap on top of the old one, and wore both of them stacked on his head for the rest of the afternoon, which is the most Eli thing I can imagine. I sat on their porch for 2 hours that afternoon. We talked about cantilever bridges and suspension bridges, and the difference between compression and tension. I told him about the time in 2003 when I built a carport on a steep hillside lot and miscalculated the footings the first time around and had to tear the whole thing out and pour the foundation again from scratch. He listened to every single word with those serious eyes of his, sitting perfectly still the way only a child who is genuinely interested can sit still. When I finished the story, he asked me if the second carport held. I told him it held. I told him it was still standing 20-some years later on that same hillside. That is what I want for him. That is the whole thing, really. Something he builds with his own hands and his own mind that holds. Something that lasts. The rose bushes on Sycamore Lane bloomed all the way through the end of October that year, which was longer than usual and which felt, in some quiet way, like a gift. I checked them most mornings, standing at the kitchen window with my first cup of coffee while the sun came up over the backyard. Patricia planted those roses in 1997, the year before we bought the house, when we were still renting the apartment on Glenwood, and she was already planning for the life we would build. She told me once that the trick to keeping roses was not to overwater them, that they do better. She said, when you make them work a little for what they need, when they have to reach down deep for the moisture instead of having it handed to them at the surface. She knew more than I ever will about most things. About roses, about patience, about the quiet, fierce, stubborn work of making something grow. I think about that a good deal. On the mornings when the yard is still and the coffee is hot and the light comes through the kitchen window the way it has every morning for 28 years. I think about the structure I have spent my life building, not the houses and carports and church additions, but the other kind, the kind with no blueprints and no permits, the kind you build one decision at a time, one kept promise at a time, and you hope that when you are done, the structure is sound. As best I can tell, it is. Yeah, I said, I am okay.